how I discovered a hidden domain and transformed it into an amazing lesson for the CEO CTO. Jake Larson had always felt like a ghost in a machine, drifting through the hum of computers at the tech support center in his small Midwestern town. Day in and day out, he dealt with frantic calls from users, desperately seeking solutions to their problems, while his own ambition floated like a distant bubble just out of reach. Now, with his parents facing increasing health issues and the weight of financial strain on his shoulders, dreams of a better life felt like a luxury he could not afford. He longed for something more, yet the burdens of duty often chained him to mediocrity, his hope fading under the gray Midwest skies. The rain tapped against the windows, mirroring the storm in his mind, when he stumbled into his grandfather's old farmhouse. Among the dusty relics of the past, he found an envelope, worn and forgotten. Inside, he discovered a tech patent, shimmering with unrealized possibilities. His pulse quickened, a thrill of potential coursing through him, but in its wake, self-doubt surged like the tide. Who was he to disrupt the giants? The industry was a fortress, and he felt like an intruder. Jake? The voice of Clara, a retired engineer, echoed in his thoughts. He had reached out to her, seeking guidance as he navigated the uncertainties of the tech world. Her spirit was fierce, her wisdom a steady current against his meandering doubt. "Believe in yourself," she had said, but that was easier said than done. Each time he envisioned presenting his patent to the corporate titans, those images of disinterested glances and mocking laughter clouded his mind. The very thought sent shivers through him. Before he knew it, the day of reckoning loomed closer, and tension tightened around his chest like a vice. He had spent countless nights preparing, not just to showcase his discovery, but to confront the systemic exploitation he had unearthed. What if they reject me? He thought, wrestling with the gnawing fear of failure. Would this patent, a symbol of his hard work and sacrifice, be seen as a threat instead of an opportunity? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. Jake's mind raced as he rehearsed his pitch. Each graph, each projection was meticulously crafted, but a nagging voice whispered doubts, a reminder of the CEO and CTO, whose privilege dangled like a noose around his neck. They were the embodiment of everything he had fought against, their disdain for anyone outside their world palpable. Could he convince them to see the value that even he struggled to comprehend? The night before the presentation, he couldn't sleep, his muscles tense, mind spiraling into anxiety at the thought of being just another invisible COG. As he stood at the edge of this precipice, fear and determination intertwined, wrapping him in a cloak of anguish. The voices of his family echoed in his ears, their sacrifices forging a painful reminder. What if he failed? What if this was the moment he'd become just another victim of a ruthless system? The stakes were alarmingly high. Jake took a deep breath, steeling himself for a confrontation with not just the executives, but with his own fears, reluctant to let mediocrity claim him once and for all. Would his revelation break through their indifference, or would he vanish into the background of a world that had little room for someone like him? The weight of his uncertainty threatened to crush him as he stepped into that boardroom, unaware of the storm brewing within, ready to challenge the very fabric of an industry designed to silence voices like his. Jake stood before the polished conference table, the steely glare of the CEO and CTO weighing down on him, each second feeling like an eternity. The room felt stifling, a sharp contrast to the bustling world of innovation he had imagined. His heart raced as he steadied his breath, forcing himself to remember Clara's words, a mantra of belief swirling in his mind. "Thank you both for this opportunity," he began, voice steadier than he felt. The figures on the projector flickered to life. He hesitated, glancing at their expressions. They appeared uninterested, scrolling through their devices, eyes darting around the room. A visceral wave of doubt threatened to wash over him. What could he say that was worth their attention? But with every passing moment, images of his family drifted into view, his father's weary eyes brimming with resignation, his mother's soft smile despite the weight of illness, her hope unmarred. His driving force had sacrificed so much. Jake straightened, grounding himself in purpose. He defined himself not as an intruder, but as a harbinger of change, a beacon amid the indifference. My patent addresses the inefficiencies that have long plagued our industry, he asserted, a note of conviction creeping into his voice. It's not just a tool, it's a blueprint for a more equitable future in tech. He traced his finger along the sleek graphs. Visualizations depicting spiraling costs and lost productivity painted a stark narrative of an industry on the brink of inertia. At that moment, he saw their eyes flicker with curiosity. Maybe it had struck a nerve after all. They leaned in slightly, their demeanor shifting. He pushed forward, highlighting potential market implications and profitability, the data anchoring his assertions with irrefutable logic. Jake talked of breaking down the walls that separated innovation from accessibility, yet amidst the rising hope, questions bubbled within him. As he oversaw their subtle reactions, he wondered, was he still just another desperate voice fighting against a cold tide? Would their intrigue hold fast against the tide of self-preservation inherent to their roles? The shadow of doubt loomed. He needed to confront it directly. Pausing for effect, he locked eyes with the CEO. Change doesn't come easily. It challenges the status quo. It unsettles the very foundations we've built upon. But that foundation is flawed, and if you're willing to take a risk, imagine where we could be. A heartbeat passed, marked only by the sound of the hum from the projector, a stark reminder of the technological world they embraced yet often overlooked. The silence felt electric, a precipice of possibility teetering on the edge of realization. Now, he had to address the looming elephant in the room. But I understand there's a risk of fear of turning against the very culture that has brought power. That's what I want to discuss. Are you ready to fight against complacency and embrace disruption? As their gazes sharpened, Jake's resolve solidified. He was not merely pitching a patent. He was advocating for a transformation, a progressive shift toward responsibility in tech. The stakes were no longer just his future. They involved a collective awakening to accountability. But just as hope flickered, Jake sensed a hesitance in the air, an unspoken reluctance from the CTO, whose expression had turned dark. You think revolution is that easy? Change comes at a cost, and costs come in far more than just dollars. The challenge hung in the air like a noose, tightening around him. Jake recognized the moment for what it was, a confrontation not only with the corporate giants in front of him but with the lingering doubts he fought against daily. This was a chance to not just advocate for an idea but to assert his identity, to challenge diminishing remarks that threatened his mission. With rising adrenaline, he took a step closer to the table, refusing to back down. Then, what is the cost of doing nothing? He countered, his voice firm and steady. How many miracles gone unshared? How many lives and ideas brushed aside? I understand the implications of change, embracing the unknown, but if we fail to address that fear, we perpetuate the cycle of stagnation. As he spoke, he felt an unprecedented clarity, grasping the heavy weight of his circumstances, yet still pushing against it. A renewed conviction ignited within him. The boardroom felt more like a battleground now, no longer a platform of cool indifference, but a crucible for transformation. As he finished, eyes wide and breath held, he prepared for the retribution of their doubt. Would this be the catalyst or the prelude to his unraveling? The air shimmered, thick with tension, leaving the next move unclear. Would they stand with him, or would fear lead to ruin? The silence broke unnaturally, a clattering of devices interrupted by an unexpected chuckle from the CEO, who leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. You have passion, Jake. But passion doesn't pay the bills. The flippant dismissal landed heavy, cutting through the energy he had so carefully cultivated. Doubt crept back in a faint whisper, nagging at the edges of his mind. Realigning his focus, Jake regarded the CEO and CTO with renewed determination. In their dismissive aura, he sensed an opportunity, a chance to cultivate dialogue rather than defend his position. What if passion is the very fuel we need to innovate effectively? What if we let it drive this company in a direction that not only profits but also serves? The CTO, a figure of skepticism and experience, met his gaze with a sharp edge. And what if that passion leads us into blind alleys? We can't afford to gamble our resources on idealism. Jake recognized the stakes, but behind the skepticism was a spark of curiosity. He considered how to leverage their caution. That's a valid point. I'm not suggesting we disregard the practical implications. Rather, I propose we find a balance, a way to harness innovation while mitigating risks. Inwardly, he searched for the right approach, a way to enliven his data without sacrificing clarity. He took a breath and maneuvered back to his slides. Let us examine this from another angle. Instead of focusing solely on the costs of my patent, let us explore the long-term savings gained through efficiency. We can lead the market, not just follow it. As he painted the potential roadmap, he began to see the CEO's interest rekindle. The graph representing not just cost savings, but also market expansion began to resonate. The numbers, stark and devoid of emotion, morphed into a narrative of hope, driving his ambition towards a vision. This could be more than just numbers. This could be a compelling story that spoke to their fears as much as their ambitions. Precisely, the CEO mused, eyebrows lifting in intrigue. But what about implementation? What obstacles do you foresee, and how do we navigate them? Jake felt a surge of empowerment. They were finally engaging. Challenges are inevitable, but instead of fearing them, let us embrace them as opportunities for growth. We can pilot the implementation in a smaller division, test the waters before full-scale adoption. This combination of proof and calculated risk can pave the way. As he spoke, he felt the tension begin to dissipate. There was a communion of ideas forming a synergy, replacing the previous divide. Even the CTO, who had remained stoic, appeared to reconsider the boundaries of what was possible. With each proposal, Jake found himself affirming not just his plans, but himself as well. But as he moved into deeper analysis, he sensed a flicker of doubt emanating from within. What if this breakthrough was no more than a temporary veil over their skepticism? What if he fell short of meeting their expectations or, worse, let his family down? The foundation of his resolve wobbled. With a sharp intake of breath, he shook off the unease. This was no time for self-doubt. To use a metaphor, I see this like sailing into uncharted waters. At times, we might feel lost, yet amid uncertainties lies the potential for discovery. Isn't that what innovation entails? Jake watched the subtle shift in their expressions, the spark of challenge igniting a serious deliberation. But then, just as quickly, the CTO interjected, his brow furrowed with new intensity. What if we fail, Jake? Failing on your terms means losing everything we've worked for: reputation, investments, and trust. Are you ready to shoulder the responsibility of that risk? Jake's heart dropped. This was the moment he feared the most, the weight of accountability. But it also felt like the ultimate opportunity to redefine himself. I cannot promise we won't stumble, but I can promise to guard against pitfalls with vigilance. If we don't take the plunge, we'll never know what we're capable of or how far our reach can extend. As silence descended, once more, he realized the stakes had dramatically shifted. It was no longer simply about convincing them. It was about sharing the strange thrill of potential. But beneath it all, the internal conflict churned. If he failed, he risked not just this opportunity, but the vision for the legacy he hoped to create. The glint of uncertainty lingered in the air, and he sensed the tipping point fast approaching. Would they embrace this uncertain journey? Or would the fear of failure send them retreating into the familiar shadows of complacency? Jake's next words could either propel them forward or anchor them firmly in place. The moment felt electric, filled with unfinished business, a hesitation that could define or doom him. Would this be the dawn of transformation, or just another fleeting chance fading into the abyss? A pulse raced through Jake's veins as the silence thickened, charged with expectancy. He scrutinized the faces of the CEO and CTO, searching for signs that his argument had struck a chord. The room felt both like a battleground and a sanctuary, a place where ideas clashed as fiercely as they flourished. With every second, he felt the pressure mount. This was no longer merely a presentation, it was a test of his integrity and vision. But Jake, the CTO's voice cut through the tension again, laden with skepticism. What evidence do you have of this potential? How can you assure us that our resources won't be in vain? Instead of crumbling under the weight, Jake recognized the opening. This was the chance to demonstrate what he cultivated during his years in the trenches, the blend of theoretical knowledge and practical insight that set him apart. I've been researching similar innovations in our industry. I can present case studies where initial investments led to unprecedented savings and market growth. They navigated those uncharted waters, and so can we. He wasn't just selling an idea anymore. He was sharing a vision rooted in research, predicated on the success of others. The confidence that had momentarily flickered ignited again, fueled by the prospect of transformation not just for the company, but for himself as well. The CEO tilted his head, curiosity piqued. I want to see these case studies. If the data supports your narrative, it might shift the dynamics of how we approach this. Jake nodded, energized. Absolutely. I'll compile a detailed report and present it next week. But let us also prepare for the next phase, building a conversation among departments about this approach. Collaboration will be central to our success. A realization struck him. He had not only aligned their objectives with his own, but had woven a fabric of interdependence between them all. The strength of his idea lay not just in its numbers, but in its capacity to nurture an environment where every team member felt a stake in the company's forward momentum. As they discussed the logistics and potential pilot frameworks further, Jake's mind raced toward implementation strategies. He needed to ensure that passion was not a fleeting anecdote, but a sustained fire. What way could he integrate the voices of his colleagues in innovative processes? Was there a platform through which they could contribute ideas or estimate impacts? In the chaos of those thoughts, a nagging doubt returned. Even if he secured buy-in from the executives, could the cultural resistance within the organization be dismantled? Doubts loomed large. The very fear of ridicule he battled years ago started crawling back. But he clamped down on it, daring to imagine a new reality. The presentation was merely a seed, ready to burst forth with the right nurturing. The potential to influence this corporate culture sat tantalizingly within reach. It would take more than charts. It required heart and conviction to rally his colleagues behind this new vision. As the meeting reached its end, Jake felt a wave of collective resolve. Each participant carried traces of uncertainty, but there were also budding commitments to Jake's initiative. But just as optimism seeped into the air, the CTO posed one final question that sent a chill through him. Jake, if we do this, and if it fails, how do we recover from that fallout? For a brief moment, Jake's mind spiraled, grappling with dark imaginings. In an instant, he recognized that the fear of failure, while paralyzing, was also a motivational force. We will learn, he answered, letting the gallery of ideas mature in his mind. Each step taken will equip us, not just to succeed, but to innovate resiliently. As they sorted out logistics to push forward, Jake realized that this journey was not merely about pursuing success. It was about embracing the essence of growth itself, however messy or uncertain it might be. He was anchored now, rooted in a deeper understanding of risk, leadership, and partnership. Yet, amidst all this, another nagging thought lingered unaddressed, the aspects of his personal life that could collapse under this weight. He knew he must balance his ambition with the well-being of his loved ones. As they departed, he contemplated how to maintain that critical equilibrium. Determined to pursue this dual commitment, Jake found himself staring out at the city skyline, thinking about the path ahead. It felt monumental, daunting, but more importantly, it was a chance to discover what lay hidden within himself. The stakes were set, the moment ripe for transformation. But deep down, Jake feared that this journey might lead him to face not only the judgment of his peers, but also a reckoning of his own insecurities that he had yet to confront head-on. In the pursuit of change, would he continue to evolve, or would the shadows of his past drag him back into the depths of self-doubt? The following week unfolded in a whirl of preparation. Jake sunk himself into research, sifting through metrics and narratives of growth he'd cautiously unearthed from successful companies willing to challenge the status quo. As he analyzed each case study, a sense of possession blossomed within him. It wasn't just about data. It was a tapestry woven from the threads of innovation and determination. This was his moment to illuminate the path forward, not just for the company, but for those who had dared to dream beyond their comfort zones. Amidst late nights fueled by coffee and fervor, Jake unearthed a pattern: the willingness to embrace risk paired with a culture that fostered communication. He began to visualize his proposal, not merely as a set of slides, but as a narrative one that spoke of shared purpose and collaborative effort. He craved his colleagues to see this not as a top-down initiative, but as a grassroots movement celebrating creativity and responsibility. As he crafted his report, doubts surfaced. Would his colleagues genuinely buy into this vision? The thought of facing another round of skepticism haunted him. Was he preparing them for success, or setting them up for failure once again? With every keystroke, he battled the paradox of ambition and vulnerability. Was his ambition merely a facade masking a more profound anxiety? With each notion, a soft voice whispered that he might be pushing too hard, too fast. During a late-night brainstorming session, Jake found solace in the rhythm of his laptop keys. He took a moment to reflect, modeling himself in the shoes of the team he aimed to lead. It was the fear of rejection he wrestled with, that perennial sense of inadequacy that threatened to undermine his best efforts. If he believed in this transformation, he needed to create a space where stakeholders felt empowered to contribute their visions, their hesitations, and their aspirations. How could he systematically invite others to share the weight of this venture? Motivated, Jake sketched out a platform for dialogue, a forum that balanced transparent communication with rigorous accountability. There, every voice could contribute to innovative ideas, support calculated risks, and cultivate a culture of mutual growth. Days rolled forward, and as he prepared to present his findings, the room buzzed with an electric anticipation. The moments leading up to his presentation felt surreal. He stood at the precipice of change, staring into the abyss of what could be. The moment arrived. He took a deep breath as he entered the boardroom, filled with all eyes on him. The faint hum of chatter hushed as he began to unveil his research. He felt the initial flicker of doubt, flaring again like a warning light in his psyche. Would the data resonate? Would this be the turning point he envisioned, or another series of unanswered questions? As the statistics rolled out, a peculiar resolve settled over him. He was sharing more than numbers. He was sharing the potential for growth that mirrored his own journey. With every graph and anecdote, he nudged the door to collaboration ajar, beckoning his colleagues to step through along with him. Yet, even as he observed skeptical expressions shift into intrigue, a lingering fear gripped him, a latent worry that perhaps his acceptance relied too heavily on their validation. It was time, he realized, for him to confront the shadows that lurked beneath his ambition. What would happen if this endeavor spiraled beyond his control? What if failure awaited on the other side? As he approached the horizon of the imperative decisions embedded in the venture, Jake felt a sharp, exhilarating urgency. He sensed he was not only presenting a proposal to revive the company, but also unveiling pieces of himself that he long buried. The duality of fear and fortitude danced within him. To foster resilience in his colleagues, he needed to embody it fully in his own life. The moment climaxed when Jake posed the question, how will we collectively define success, and how will we harness our individual strengths to hold each other accountable? It was a simple, yet profound inquiry, one that hinted at the vulnerability and courage he wanted to inspire. But deep within, another question loomed larger than any he'd faced yet. What would happen if those he sought to inspire were unwilling to partner in this vision? Would he have the fortitude to stand firm against the tide of dissent, or would he buckle beneath the weight of disappointment? He caught the CTO's eye, searching for a hint of approval, hoping the conversations sparked would ignite a commitment stronger than fear. Jake's heart pounded. This was more than a professional endeavor. It was a personal odyssey, forcing him to confront his own limits and aspirations. As he finished his presentation, the air grew thick with unspoken anticipation. He realized there lay another revelation yet to unfold, a truth about the power of vulnerability, both in himself and in leadership. With the eyes of the room watching him closely, Jake could feel the walls closing in, and he braced himself for the verdict. Would he become the architect of transformation or merely a curious observer of another missed opportunity? The answer hung precariously in the balance, poised right before him. The silence in the boardroom was palpable, stretching out like a taut string ready to snap. As the last slide of his presentation flickered off the screen, the weight of the moment descended. Was it anticipation or dread that filled the air? Jake scanned the faces from his makeshift podium, searching for affirmation or even the slightest glimmer of understanding. In a world where certainty was a prized possession, vulnerability felt like stepping onto a tightrope. When the CTO finally spoke, his voice cut through the stillness like a knife. "We're impressed with the depth of your research, Jake. However, I'm curious, how do you propose we implement such drastic changes without facing pushback? We've failed before." The question landed heavy in Jake's gut, amplifying the concerns he had kept submerged. He started to respond, but for a moment, words evaporated. He could feel the energy in the room shift, turning into a spotlight on his fears. Was he really prepared to buckle under their skepticism? A familiar doubt seeped in. What if this truly was another misguided attempt to rejuvenate a waning culture? "I've drafted a proposal for phases," he managed, clenching his fists under the table. "Starting small will allow us to measure impact without overwhelming the team. Engaging key stakeholders from the outset will ensure that we maintain enthusiasm and adjust as necessary." A ripple of murmurs swept through the room, individuals exchanging glances as if processing the implications. Each nervous expression felt like a countdown clock ticking away the potential of his vision. "Bridging our past failures to current realities isn't easy," the CTO continued. "You have to understand that history doesn't disappear just because we have a new plan." His sharp gaze pinned Jake in place. A part of Jake wanted to recoil, to abandon this uphill battle. But something deeper stirred within him, a defiance. "That's exactly why this is critical," Jake replied with forced confidence. "We can't define our future by our past failures. We need a framework that invites open discussion about what went wrong without shame. Transparency will pave the way for trust." The CTO raised an eyebrow, intrigued yet skeptical. "Can you give us a clear example of how you'd facilitate that?" Jake wrestled with his thoughts. How could he translate this monumental aspiration into tangible structures? He had envisioned a platform for dialogue but needed specifics that would leave no room for doubt. "Consider regular brainstorming sessions, possibly bi-weekly, where teams can discuss current projects, share feedback, and suggest changes. In my research, I found that when employees feel their opinions matter, they invest more in outcomes." Nods and contemplative expressions began to punctuate the tension. The murmur of potential took root. Yet a nagging anxiety nestling in his brain persisted. Would this really incite the change he wanted, or was he just building a house of cards? With effort, he shifted focus back to the audience. "I believe this is a unique chance for us to redefine what failure means, to frame it as a stepping stone rather than a roadblock." Each word felt heavier, but the collective energy leaned his way, feeding his resolve. Would they embrace this opportunity or retreat into the familiar confines of doubt? As hands raised around the room, posing logistical questions and challenges, Jake felt their engagement ignite a flicker of possibility. "All right, let us say we take this leap," one of his colleagues interjected. "What happens when people refuse to engage in this new approach? How do you plan to manage dissent?" The question hung more perilously than the last. Dissent loomed as a specter, quick to undermine even the most ambitious endeavors. Could he create an environment where fear gave way to constructive criticism? As he clamored for a suitable reply, his mind blurred with fragments of inspiration. "I'd propose a phased feedback loop, creating a safe space for dissenters. We need to actively listen for concerns before they spiral into grievances. In that space, we cultivate resilience in each other. The room contemplated his response, and for the first time, Jake felt the thread of doubt loosening its grip. Was he beginning to spark the transformation he sought? Yet deep within, a daunting realization simmered. Wasn't he merely presenting his ideas? He was invoking a call to arms, an invitation to leap into uncharted territories. What would happen if their steadfast allegiance to the old ways proved stronger than his unyielding vision for innovation? As the dialogue evolved, the stakes rose. This was not just about business, but about forging a new version of himself, one who would not cower in the face of opposition. With the CTO nodding thoughtfully, Jake realized they were entering uncharted waters together. Would he have the strength to paddle through the torrents of dissent, or would he find himself drowning in his own aspirations? The tension coiled tightly, with tomorrow's challenges promising to reveal not just the fate of his proposal, but the evolving paths of his professional identity. Would this transformative endeavor become the catalyst for his growth, or would he falter beneath the very tides he aimed to harness for change? The morning sun streamed through the expansive glass windows of the boardroom, casting sharp shadows that contrasted starkly to the weight of the discussion that had unfolded the day before. Jake arrived early, determined to be ready for the follow-up meetings that could either solidify his ideas or dismantle them altogether. The room felt different today. There was a sense of potential and peril interweaving through the air, pulsating beneath the surface. Jake's heart thrummed in tandem with the ticking clock on the wall, as a cascade of thoughts whirled in his mind. Yesterday had been a watershed moment, marking a shift not just in the company culture he hoped to spark, but within himself. Unlike the past, when he had often crumbled under pressure, he felt a newly forged resolve course through him, a defiant urgency to prove himself capable, not just in theory, but in execution. The knowledge of that potential was electrifying. As colleagues trickled in, he greeted them with a confidence that felt somewhat unfamiliar. That small victory engaging them rather than retreating into self-doubt made him realize that he was no longer merely a spectator to changing tides. He was the architect of those shifts. With this realization came an unsettling truth. The path forward would not be without resistance. The tremors of dissent were only just beginning. When the CTO entered, Jake's stomach tightened. There was a challenge in the man's expression. "Jake, the team's feedback has been varied. Some appreciate your enthusiasm, while others remain apprehensive about the risks involved in your proposals. They fear change. How do you intend to rally everyone under this new direction?" The question was direct, yet laced with an implicit invitation. The CFO leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, as if anticipating Jake's answer to also reflect his own thoughts about sticking with the status quo. "I believe we can reshape this challenge into an opportunity for inclusion," Jake began, locking eyes with the CTO. "If we can establish smaller focus groups that echo the brainstorming sessions I mentioned, it would allow individuals to express concerns in a more intimate environment. This way, they feel connected rather than isolated." As Jake spoke, each word resonated with a growing conviction. He envisioned a vibrant tapestry of voices, each contributing to a renewed corporate culture. But he also felt the weight of doubt creeping in the thought that perhaps his naivety regarding the team's collective spirit might backfire. "Let us talk logistics," the CTO interjected, his steady eyes still focused on Jake. "What safeguards will you implement to ensure that these groups don't evolve into mere complaint sessions?" "We need mechanical structures to manage dissent effectively." Jake paused, letting the question linger as ideas spun in his mind. It was critical to show that he was prepared for this avalanche of opposition. Creating clear agendas would be essential, he proposed, allowing himself a small nod as confidence began to anchor. "We'll frame each session around solutions, rather than just airing grievances." Additionally, appointing neutral facilitators can guide discussions, helping us navigate through negativity toward constructive outcomes. Murmurs of approval began to ripple through the room. Adrenaline surged through Jake, illuminating his pathway through the murky landscape of compliance and resistance. This wasn't merely a presentation, This was a frontier. He was starting to carve out the beginnings of a new version of himself tethered to leadership, initiative, and resilience. However, the voice of hesitation echoed in the back of his mind. What if the facilitators lose control? He questioned internally, grappling with his fear that his plans might crumble if dissenters did not engage positively. Just then, a voice rose above the chatter, drawing Jake from his thoughts. What if we use anonymous feedback tools? A colleague suggested. It might encourage participation without the fear of confrontation. The relief flooding through him was palpable. Here was a glimmer of hope, an affirmation that change did not rest solely on his shoulders. It could be collective, a new path forged together, even amid skepticism. But as he felt the tides shifting toward an inclusive conversation, a different concern gripped him. Would the people he sought to empower feel as capable as he had begun to? As doubt flickered within him, he realized that there were still deeper layers of trust and vulnerability yet to be explored. Suddenly, an idea sparked. What if he opened avenues for not only discussing problems, but sharing personal stories of failure and redemption? By inviting vulnerability, he could challenge others to confront the emotions that paralyzed them. The clock inched closer to the meeting as start, and the pressing weight of time pushed him to act. Radical transparency could serve as a catalyst for connection if he could expose his own fears. Could he prompt others to do the same? As he mentally rehearsed his new approach, the unanswered questions loomed large. Would unveiling his vulnerabilities invite others to reciprocate, or risk further alienation? Jake steeled himself, aware that the next hour would mark another defining moment. He would either pioneer a collective breakthrough or face a rebuff of his aspirations. As the colleagues settled into their seats, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter would reach beyond mere professional stakes. This was about laying bare his ambitions and confronting his insecurities. What awaited him was not just a chance to lead, but to understand firsthand the intricate dance of vulnerability and resilience. And with it came a realization. Today would test not just his proposals, but the essence of who he was becoming. As he took a deep breath, he knew within this battleground of minds his greatest growth, yet was poised to unfold. Could he forge a new path from the very heart of uncertainty? The moment was upon him, and with it, the weight of what was yet to be discovered. As the clock struck the hour, an unsettling quiet enveloped the boardroom. The morning sun still filtered in, teasing light into the pervasive tension that buzzed in the air. Jake shifted in his seat, battling the impulse to retreat into his mind. Today wasn't just about defending proposals, it was a personal crusade. He owed it to himself to instigate a change that ran deeper than processes or policies. Thank you all for joining, Jake began, summoning all the confidence he could muster. Today, I'd like us to explore not only our challenges, but also our personal journeys. He paused, scanning the faces before him, a mixture of skepticism and curiosity greeting his proposal. Let us start by sharing stories. I believe that understanding our individual experiences can create a stronger foundation for collaboration. The words felt bold, dangerous even. But as they left his mouth, Jake was met with hushed murmurs. Doubt crept in. Had he overstepped? The CTO's brow furrowed, and Jake knew he had to anchor him back into the conversation. To illustrate my point, I'll go first, he pushed, surprising himself with his resolve. When I first worked on a significant project, I was overwhelmed by the expectations. Instead of rising to the challenge, I froze and ultimately failed. It was incredibly humbling. This taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness. It can spark innovation and trust. There was an unusual silence that followed, thick with contemplation. Jake could feel the walls of uncertainty beginning to crack. As he briefly glanced around the room, he noticed a fellow manager, Laura, leaning forward, her curiosity piqued, or perhaps her empathy engaged. I had something similar happen. She finally spoke, her voice wavering slightly. On my first big campaign, I mismanaged the budget. The financial repercussions were severe, and I felt completely lost. But that setback led to the best idea I've ever implemented: a system to ensure financial tracking. Encouraged, others chimed in, the energy shifting from defensive to reflective. Stories of failure, frustration, and unexpected learning flowed freely. Jake couldn't remember being this captivated in a meeting. He felt a sense of connection forming, a tapestry of shared experiences knitting together into a stronger team. Yet, a whirlwind of thoughts loomed closer. As intimate tales unfolded, he feared how he might be perceived. Would they still respect him if he shared his rawest moments? Would they start seeing him differently, as less of an authority figure? The potential for exposure stung at him, but he knew that confronting those worries was essential to his growth. When it was finally time for the CTO to speak, Jake braced himself. He had expected a reserved response. Instead, the man revealed small pockets of vulnerability. I struggled with a similar project at my last job. Fear of judgment often shielded me, making my decisions top-heavy. It's a lesson I carry with me. Hope kindled within Jake. Here was a glimmer of unity. Vulnerability had created a bridge where fear had existed. This was a breakthrough, but the nagging question lingered: had they ventured far enough into this exploration? Feeling bold, he addressed the group. What if we implemented not only these narratives but created a culture of accountability? By sharing our vulnerabilities, we could foster a safe space for future challenges. Perhaps we even set up regular sessions to revisit these stories, crafting continual growth from past failures. The dialogue shifted, and the group began to formulate concrete plans around his suggestion. Excitement mingled with caution, but the room felt different, alive. This was a turning point, and as Jake facilitated the discussion, he couldn't help but feel empowered. Yet doubt still whispered in the corners of his mind. Who would take the lead during these sessions? Would they actually revisit the past when the pressure mounted in the future? Could he be the very catalyst to ensure this momentum didn't fade? As the meeting concluded and colleagues departed, Jake lingered, wrestling with his thoughts. What if the openness they shared today faded with the next wave of stress? Could he cultivate a space where everyone felt free to explore their authentic selves? The answers eluded him, leaving an unsettling anticipation. But he felt a flicker of determination within him. The possibility of transformation rested on his shoulders. The journey was just beginning, and every step he took would demand unwavering courage. The moment was charged with potential, but anxiety churned in his gut. Jake left the boardroom with a hunger to better himself, to instigate a tangible change, and as he brushed his hand against the smooth walls, an idea crystallized in his mind. What if he led by example and shared a deeper part of his journey with the entire team? With his heart racing, he turned back toward the door and stepped out into the hallway, eager to continue his exploration of not just professional prowess, but personal identity. What he didn't know was that uncovering this deeper truth might just challenge everything he believed about leadership. Jake had long been accustomed to the polished veneer of professionalism that coated the walls of his office, a sanctuary of rationality devoid of personal sentiment. Yet, as he navigated the maze of his thoughts in the empty hallway, he felt the weight of his revelation pressing against the facade he had meticulously built. Sharing his vulnerabilities, he realized, could redefine everything he had strived for in his career. What would it mean to truly lead, to not merely command but to connect? A few hours later, seated at his desk with fingers poised above the keyboard, Jake felt an urge to document his thoughts. What started as a mere exercise in self-discovery quickly morphed into a manifesto of sorts, an exploration of his past mistakes, the discomfort he felt in revealing them, and the lessons he hoped to illustrate to his team. With each keystroke, he felt the tension releasing, his words flowing freely, like a stream breaking through ice. People respect success, he typed, hesitating briefly as he considered his next sentiment. But they relate through stories that reveal the humanity behind numbers and data. If I can be steadfast in my vulnerability, perhaps they will find the courage in theirs. It was liberating to articulate these thoughts, yet the looming question remained: would they be received with the same enthusiasm by those who had known him only as the strategic mind of the team? In the ensuing days, Jake dedicated himself to his initiative. He created a plan to present his unfolding vision of vulnerability and accountability. He devised a series of workshops aimed at facilitating not just dialogue but honest introspection among his peers. Each session would culminate in concrete action steps to address their challenges, utilizing the shared wisdom encapsulated in their personal stories. Still, whisperings of doubt nagged at him. Would anyone truly engage, or would they retreat back into the comfort of silence? His resolve hardened when he decided to start the first session with his own story. Tales from childhood failures, moments when inadequacy gnawed at him, and the raw truth of those experiences began materializing into a cohesive narrative. It felt alive, resonant with the struggle of many professionals who might feel shackled by the expectations of their roles. The day finally arrived. As Jake stood in front of the employees gathered for the workshop, he watched the faces before him, some eager, others skeptical. But he knew this was his moment to ignite change, to challenge the status quo of their interactions. "I want to share a significant lesson I learned about failure," he began, his heart thumping against his chest. "When I was uncertain about my direction early in my career, I stumbled in a crucial project. I feared that revealing this to my superiors would brand me unworthy of leadership. However, it was the very act of confronting my failures that turned my story toward a lesson of resilience." As he spoke, he noticed the reluctant nods, the slight shifts in posture as colleagues mentally peeled back their own layers. Jake continued, revealing not just the mistakes, but the insights gleaned from them. It felt liberating to finally reveal the man beneath the title. With every word, barriers fell, and suddenly, the room was charged with an energy that sparked connections, sparks that could potentially light new paths. Questions emerged organically, testimonies of similar struggles bubbled forth, and engagement flourished. They shared stories not only of personal failures but also of revelations, and what undid Jake further was the reflection of admiration in their eyes, not of a superior, but of a fellow traveler. Warmth radiated in the room, but Jake knew this was just the tip of an iceberg. Would this newfound trust endure when the pressure returned? And how would he sustain this flourishing environment, ensuring that vulnerability transcended moments of solace to become a continuous practice? Jake left the session buoyed, yet overwhelmed. The transformation was tangible, yet it felt precarious, like a strand of silk that could fray if not maintained. He had opened a door, but it beckoned for more exploration, for deeper connection, for the pursuit of continual unfolding. Uncertainty lingered in the corners of his mind, but the flicker of aspiration remained strong. What if this fledgling openness became not just a cornerstone of their professional lives, but a deeper exploration of who they genuinely were? The challenge lay ahead, full of promise and peril. As he gathered his notes and prepared to leave, a voice surged within him, urging him onward. It's time to face the core of your own leadership and learn how deep this journey can go. Jake stepped out of the conference room, a sense of purpose igniting within him. He was ready to confront the unseen boundaries of not just holding space, but of forging a shared future. What awaited him on this path would redefine everything he believed a leader could be. Jake stood at the edge of the well-lit conference room, a space that once felt imposing now radiated with possibility. The series of workshops he had initiated had transformed into a collective journey of introspection and empowerment. The atmosphere buzzed with renewed energy, conversations filled with both candor and courage. This was not just a professional renaissance for him, it was a profound personal metamorphosis that manifested in each discussion, each shared story, and every moment of vulnerability. With a sense of solid confidence, he prepared to present the final synthesis of the workshops. Over the past weeks, he had observed a remarkable change. Where once his colleagues held on to apprehensions, a culture of openness had begun to flourish. They were eager to dive deeper into their experiences, creating a cascade of collaborative resilience. Faces that once appeared skeptical now lit up with enthusiasm, fostering an environment dedicated to accountability and innovation. Today was the moment he would bring everything together into a concrete proposal that encapsulated these transformations, one that would reverberate through the corporate structure like a beacon of hope. "Thank you all for being part of this journey," he began, feeling the weight of the responsibility resting comfortably on his shoulders. "What we've built together is more than a response to our challenges. It's a pathway to redefine our approach to innovation by embracing the humanity within the numbers. As he unveiled the new collaborative framework, Jake outlined specific initiatives inspired by feedback from the sessions. A structured system of bi-weekly success-sharing meetings, anonymous feedback channels, and designated vulnerability champions emerged as fundamental components. Each pillar of this proposal demonstrated not just a shift in protocol but also a marked elevation of trust and teamwork. He witnessed nods of approval, murmurs of agreement, and an unmistakable sense of solidarity. His colleagues were not just passive spectators. They were becoming champions of this journey of change alongside him. Would they embrace these ideas? The uncertainty that once gnawed at him was now replaced by a deeper understanding of the collective strength they've forged. Before we move forward, I'd like to share what I learned about leadership through our discussions and experiences, he continued. True leadership lies in the courage to show up as one's authentic self and to invite others into that space. Together, we've proven that vulnerability can be a powerful catalyst for breakthrough thinking. A hush fell over the room as he paused. The fear of failure that had haunted him for so long began to dissipate, a tangible recognition that he was not merely proposing a strategy, but championing a movement. The moment felt pivotal. This was no longer about him, but about everyone in the room stepping into roles that demanded resilience and profound commitment. The CEO leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. This approach is ambitious, Jake. But I want to understand how we measure its success. He felt a burst of confidence as he articulated metrics that would define their achievements, ranging from engagement indicators to innovative outputs linked to their newfound openness. Each metric laid bare a commitment to not just innovation for profit but innovation for purpose. As the meeting moved toward its conclusion, Jake felt the satisfaction of being recognized not just as a cog in the machine but as an essential driver of change within their industry. Validation from his peers and leaders complemented his journey, affirming the growth he had achieved. He was no longer a ghost, relegated to the shadows of doubt. He was Jake Larson, a visionary poised to embrace the unknown with unshakable confidence. Walking out of the boardroom, a deep sense of fulfillment washed over him. He had acquired the necessary skills to lead. He had confronted self-doubt, turned it into strength, and fostered an atmosphere where others felt emboldened to do the same. Jake had transformed not only his career but had redefined his identity, intertwining it with the shared successes of his colleagues. The road ahead remained vital, teeming with complexities. However, he was resolute in his commitment to foster this culture of accountability and vulnerability. Each challenge was no longer a setback, but an opportunity for growth, a sentiment that would extend beyond these walls into every aspect of his life. Jake stepped outside, his pulse steady, feeling not only capable but empowered. The skies above were a brilliant blue, unrestrained, and full of potential, echoing the journey he had undertaken and the achievements that awaited. In this moment of clarity, he realized that he was the architect of his narrative, having transformed fear into a future that beckoned. He knew what he needed to do. He would continue to nurture the roots they had planted, cultivate resilience, and inspire his peers to embrace their own journeys toward greatness. The moment for transformation had arrived, and he was ready to lead the way, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. This is the moment for you to embrace your own journey. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share this transformative journey.